This BBC podcast is supported by ads outside the UK.
We got a call from the bank and said, "Are you aware that there's no funds in this account?"
A string of victims across the US, stretching from coast to coast.
The amount of victims in such a short time was unbelievable.
Real people losing real money, but the criminals are ghosts.
The anger, the frustration, the fear.
From the BBC World Service, this is Evil Corps.
The story of a cybercrime case that stretches from small-town America to the backstreets of Moscow.
Listen now. Search for Cyberhack wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the History Hour from the BBC World Service with me, Max Pearson, the past brought to life by those who were there. This week, the lone voice against the passage in 1933 of the Enabling Act that gave Hitler dictatorial powers.
Freedom and life can be taken away from us, but not honor.
Also, how Jews fleeing Nazi persecution in Germany found a surprising welcome.
I don't believe that President Quezon of the Philippines has been given enough credit. I am here today because of Filipinos.
And what happened to the other planes that were in the air on 9/11.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bat. There's been a crisis in the United States. All of the airspace is closed. We're going to be landing our airplane in Gander, Newfoundland.
That's coming up later, but we're going to begin with an important moment in cultural history. This is from 1977 in what was then Nigeria's capital city, Lagos. That was the venue for the largest festival of black and African culture that the world had ever seen. Louis Harnett O'Mara has been speaking to Viola Burley-Leak, an American artist who was there and found herself invited to an illegal party hosted by the nation's superstar.
It was so crowded, I think we went through a window. They had go-go dancers in there. You know how you have cigarette girls that carry cigarettes? They had girls that had these things they were carrying around. They were blunts, okay? Half the people were in there were like out of their mind. And when it came to Fela...
That's Fela Kuti, father of the Afrobeat music genre and an enemy of the Nigerian state.
We ended up waiting over an hour or so for him to come out and perform.
Born in 1944 to a middle-class black family in Nashville, Tennessee, Viola grew up in the racially segregated South, and as a teenager she witnessed African Americans fight for their civil liberties.
America was changing in terms of race and how it was dealing with black people. It was a time for the Black Power movements, and it was a time in which black was beautiful.
After university, she moved to New York City, where she established herself as a printmaker and artist.
People were dropping their slave names and adopting African names, you know. People were going back to African heritage. And even in my own work, I was using like a lot of masks and symbolisms that, you know, were of African background.
In this context, Nigeria's military decided to host a major international event for 500,000 visitors with 16,000 delegates, which they called Festac’. It would be on a scale comparable to an Olympic Games, but instead of sport, it highlighted Pan-African culture. Among those selected to present artworks as part of the month-long festival was Viola.
When we got on the plane and started getting to the equator, the plane itself warmed up and we started pulling clothes off, sweaters and all of that kind of stuff. And then when we finally landed and I looked and I saw these military people out there with guns, I'm like, oh my God.
I mean, how familiar were you with the political background in Nigeria before you left?
I knew that it was a military government. And consequently, it seemed like forever before we could actually go because they had to make sure that it was safe for us to travel.
Despite the heavy military presence, Viola was whisked through customs, eventually making it to the festival village in time to attend the opening ceremony.
It was like opening a page of National Geographic. We saw a representation of almost every black person that was in Africa or other places in the world.
Here's how NPR's Charlie Cobb reported the event.
There are hundreds of black scholars and creative artists here, seeking to define the black world and wrestling with what sort of commitment to make toward its development. Like the music and dance and rhythm we watch and hear nightly, there is wide and sometimes clashing diversity. Festac hopes to develop at least the beginnings of some conceptualization of the black world and outline some of the commitments required from intellectuals of the black world.
With the ceremonial cauldron lit and doves released into the crowd, people from dozens of African nations and those of the African diaspora paraded through the stadium.
You see all of the different types of dress that people had. Some people were catching the birds, catching the doves, It was crazy.
Delegates came to the ceremony wearing all sorts of colourful costumes, ornate headdresses and matching outfits. Then, when it came to the US's turn...
The Americans had nothing. We just had blue jeans. We were the only ones that came in. It seemed like we didn't have any costume. We had tennis shoes and blue jeans. That's what we came in.
Estimates for the total cost of the festival range massively. The UK's Guardian newspaper suggested it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with vast sums spent on the new National Theatre and a 9,000-unit festival village.
Festac Village was very interesting because it was a more of a kind of European way of living rather than the way that everyday people in Africa were living. We had water for showers, and we also had a transportation system where they would come and pick us up, from the different housing that we were in. They had these huge tents that were set up with women, delivering the food every day, like huge cafeteria style. And that's where we would get to meet people from other places.
With so many different cultures in one place, though, people didn't always get along.
When Egypt came, they came late. They even came into the cafeteria late. And they were very forceful. They started banging pans and making noises and causing all kind of uproars and upheavals because they felt they should be served right away. And the Nigerian women looked at them and said, okay, you're going to do it? You're not going to get any food. So they just walked off and left them until they came to their senses.
Tensions went beyond cultural differences. The military loomed over Lagos.
We had a taxi or something that took us up to the National Theatre the first time. And the guy that was driving, the military person there, asked him to show some identification. And it was like they tried to humiliate people, would tell them to get out of the car, get down on your knees. And it was just abusive.
Fela Kuti, Nigeria's musical superstar, shared Viola's distrust of the military.
What Fela did was he brought out the injustices that were going on in Nigeria at the time. His music was about it. He was never quiet about it.
While Fela helped organise Festac at first, he later refused to take part, accusing the government of corruption and brutality. Against the wishes of the Nigerian government, he hosted rival concerts in a separate compound he called Africa Shrine.
The African Shrine did not look like any great, wonderful building that you would go, oh my God, I really want to go there, It was like a one-floor building. It had windows around it. There was some problem at the door or whatever. I swear we went through a window and ended up stepping almost on a table to get in. Fela was there. He had all his women there. And then we waited I don't know how long. And then he comes out in a pair of red Speedo shorts. Swimsuit. I'm like, this is so wild, We often wondered what was going to happen to him when we left. And, of course, what happened to him was that his place was raided. His mother was just about killed.
Soldiers stormed Fela's compound shortly after Festac. His mother was badly injured after they threw her out of a second-story window, and she died a year later. It was a bitter epilogue to a messy, celebratory chapter in African cultural history. The violence of it all was enough to leave many black intellectuals and artists asking, was it all worth it?
Everything that people do, whether you're conscious or unconscious, it affects you. And yes, it did affect me. It affected my drawing and the way that I would see things. It gave me a whole different perspective on how to work, how to bring out figures in a sense that were almost mythical or just being free to draw in different ways.
It also reminded the world of the value of black and African culture, when in the US black people were fighting for their rights.
Black is Beautiful was being put up front, and that was in the forefront of news. Civil rights is something which you always have to work on. But times have changed, and the money is not there to do these kind of festivals, and then is there the interest to do them again? I think it would be great if it happened again, but it's hard reliving the past.
Viola Burley-Leek, the African-American artist and designer, sharing her experience of the spectacular opening ceremony and late-night revelry of Festac’77. She was talking to Luis Harnett O'Mara. Well, Lucy Duran is a Spanish ethnomusicologist, record producer and professor at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. Did it really do the job of promoting African culture?
Oh, without any doubt. I mean, it was one in a series of very iconic festivals which were Pan-African and based in Africa and featuring Black and African culture from around the world, including Aboriginal people. Festac was really the biggest. It was hugely well publicized, with major artists there, really incredible. Stevie Wonder, Gilberto Gil from Brazil, Sun Ra Orchestra, with their cosmic sound and their very radical philosophy, and so many others. And Bembe Jazz from Guinea, and the Mali National Ensemble featuring Sidiki Djebate. There's never been anything like it since.
So what has been the legacy?
Well, I think in many ways, it really raised the profile of Nigeria and Nigerian music. And of course, Fela was famously or infamously not included in Festac. He refused to participate in it. But I think in many ways it raised his profile. And then I think the exchange between Yoruba culture from southern Nigeria and its impact in the New World through the legacy, through the terrible legacy of enslavement, which nevertheless created some remarkable musical traditions from Cuba, for example. For instance, the bata drum, the so-called talking drums, which are sacred drums, they were recreated in Cuba by people who felt they were of Yoruba origin. And one of those musicians, the most famous, was Jesus Perez, and he went back to Yoruba land for the first time when he attended Festac. So there was backwards and forwards between the music and the arts and the cultural beliefs and language and everything that was there through the legacy of enslavement, but was really highlighted through Festac.
Did Festac spawn other festivals across Africa of a similar nature?
No, I think Festac was really the final in a series of Pan-African festivals. After Festac, it was mostly, each country doing its own festival. But before Festac, really the first big one was Fesman, which was held in Dakar, Senegal in 1966. And then there was the Pan-African Cultural Festival in Algiers in 1969, which had some amazing musicians, national ensembles from different parts of the continent, but it didn't include African-American music at all. And then there was, on the contrary, Soul to Soul, which was held in Ghana in 1971, was just full of the most amazing African-American musicians like Wilson Pickett, Ike and Tina Turner, and so many more. And then there was probably another incredible event was held in 1974 in what was then Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo. And it was a huge concert to celebrate the fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. And that concert featured James Brown, B.B. King, Fania All-Stars from the Latin band from the USA, originally from Cuba, many of them, Bill Withers, and so many other amazing musicians. So it was 1974 in what was then Zaire, and then Festac in 1977. But that was the last of those big Pan-African and, black arts from around the world.
That's the Spanish ethnomusicologist Lucy Duran on the history of music festivals across Africa. Next, we're going to look at events surrounding one of the most traumatic days in recent world history, the hijackings and destruction of the 9/11 terror attacks in the US. But this is not about violence and terror. It's about kindness and humanity. And it starts in the skies. Jane Wilkinson has the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bat. There's been a crisis in the United States. All of the airspace is closed. We're going to be landing our airplane in Gander, Newfoundland. I'll get back to you with more information when we get on the ground.
And that's what I said. Probably one of the hardest PAs I ever had to make.
This is Beverly Bass, the first female captain appointed by American Airlines. The date is the 11th of September 2001, and she's flying over the North Atlantic.
America came under attack today. The centre of New York is smouldering, with America's 2 tallest buildings in ruins. Terrorists also struck with remarkable ease at the heart of America's defence, the Pentagon. And amid the nightmare, the only estimate of fatalities is that they could run into many thousands.
Beverly had started the day in Paris, preparing to fly to Dallas, when her Boeing 777 eventually takes off. On board are 12 flight attendants, 3 pilots, and 156 passengers.
It was a magnificent day. Rarely do you cross the North Atlantic when the skies are just totally clear the whole time. But that day they were crystal blue. And we're almost 3 hours into our flight when we heard on our air-to-air frequency, one of the airplanes in front of us announced that an airplane had hit the World Trade Center.
That is the World Trade Center, and we have unconfirmed reports this morning that a plane has crashed into one of the towers of the World Trade Center.
And we figured it was a small airplane, and not that that's not tragic, but it never crossed our minds at that moment that it was an airliner. And then as we continued westbound, about 20 minutes after that first announcement, that same airplane that was in front of us came on and said, the second tower has been hit. And with that came the word terrorism.
There are several now incidents that look, for all that we can tell, to be a major terrorist attack here in the United States.
And I couldn't imagine what that really meant. We don't know whose airplanes they are. We don't know that they've been hijacked. So we're kind of continuing on in the blind.
Is there a stage while you're in the air where you're thinking, could it happen to my plane?
That really never ran through my mind, and I think it was because things were progressing pretty quickly. The next thing we heard was that New York's airspace was closed.
We are also being told that the FAA has suspended takeoffs and landings at all airports around the country, as clearly people are trying to figure out what exactly is going on.
We then knew that we were going to divert somewhere in Canada. We were ordered to land immediately in Gander, Newfoundland, which is an emergency divert airport, whether it's for a mechanical or a medical reason.
And that's when Beverly makes her announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Bat.
We were number 36 out of 38 to land that day. And we're on final approach, and I'm looking at the airport, and there are airplanes just packed in on every piece of concrete, packed in like sardines. There were nearly 7,000 passengers and crew that landed in Gander in a 3-hour time frame. And the population of the town at that time was 9,400 people. So we nearly doubled the population. I think there were like 90 countries, and I can't even remember how many languages.
What's going through your mind about how big this thing is?
We didn't have cell phones back then, and the only audio that we had on the airplane was the BBC.
Then, the unthinkable. The South Tower of the World Trade Center, the world's 4th tallest building, collapsed, followed minutes later by the center's 2nd tower. The building
It was unimaginable. Nobody could comprehend what really happened. The Canadian officials came on the airplane and they told us right then that we would not be getting off until the next day. And so the passengers just kind of camped out all night. And then Gander delivered things like water and Nutri-Grain bars and smoking patches, because remember, you can't smoke. And they actually filled 2,000 prescriptions overnight while people were on the planes, because where is their medicine? Oh, it's in their checked bag in the belly of the airplane. Can't get to it. A lot of logistics that really would never enter your mind unless you were in this situation.
The welcome continues the next morning when school buses arrive to transport the thousands of passengers and crew from the 38 planes.
When we walked into the terminal at the Gander Airport, it was just full of tables with food. I mean, I'd never seen anything like it. And they handed you a plastic bag, and you could just go around and fill that bag with anything you wanted. Fruit, sweets, sandwiches. And I thought, how can all this food be here? It is because they've been up all night preparing it. And they declared crisis emergency mode. So every airplane had one person, a liaison, a local who was in charge, and all the little surrounding communities pitched in. Many homes had passengers staying, and they used fire stations, churches, schools, legions, lodges. There were passengers sleeping on the floor. The people in Gander never stopped, and every passenger, almost 7,000, got 3 hot meals a day for 5 days. And shops just said, take anything you want off the shelves. They did not charge a dime to anybody. It was just unbelievable. And oh my gosh, did they entertain passengers? They went on canoe rides. They had big barbecues. They went on hunting trips. At night, the Ganderites would bring their instruments and they would sing and dance. They were so well taken care of for 5 days. Some of them, when we got ready to leave, did not want to leave.
It must have been such a weird feeling that something so tragic going on, and yet you were in the midst of this very warm, welcoming society.
Yes, it was very, very unusual. And, you know, my crew, every one of us knew somebody on one of those airplanes. I knew the captain who went into the Pentagon.
And there is smoke pouring out of the Pentagon. It would appear that there has been another major explosion, this one in the nation's capital. You are looking at a scene of...
It was terrible. I never did cry because I had a job to do. And now we start getting involved in the logistics of going home. And I think the most important thing was my sadness for our country and what had happened.
But Gander and the people there, did that restore that faith in humanity that you might have lost?
Well, absolutely. Newfoundlanders, they're a very hardy group of people. They will tell you it's in their DNA to help each other. And it's such a beautiful story about the kindness and the generosity of those folks. We've made lifelong friends there, and we're like connected for life.
Beverly Bass, who retired in 2008 after 32 years with American Airlines, was speaking to Jane Wilkinson. And that story about the generosity of the people of Gander, Newfoundland in 2001 later inspired a hit musical called Come From Away. It features a female pilot. Perhaps the character is based on Beverly. Still to come, the story of how the Philippines opened its doors to persecuted Jews fleeing Nazi Germany, and why are so many people so incompetent at their jobs. The 1969 book, The Peter Principle, explained.
Should we go throughout life running like a squirrel in a cage? Or should we be rational and think about, where am I going? What is the purpose of my life?
But before that, a key moment in the run-up to the Second World War. For this, we journey back to the 23rd of March 1933 to Germany, where the Enabling Act is about to be passed. It would give Hitler unrestricted powers. It was the legal foundation for his dictatorship. Jill Kersley brings us the story of one voice that spoke out to try to stop it.
Freedom and life can be taken away from us, but not honor.
Those are the words of Otto Wels, the chairman of the Social Democratic Party. These words secured him a place in history. Hitler's rise to power was accelerated in February 1933, when the Reichstag building was burnt down. Hitler used it to his advantage.
Hitler, now Chancellor, has announced that the fire was the work of communists and was intended to be the signal for a Bolshevist uprising throughout the country. In consequence, Germany has been placed under a system of martial law, a decree having been signed which aims at the total destruction of communism.
This prevented many politicians from campaigning in the election. So on the 5th of March, the National Socialist Party, known as the Nazis, won enough seats to give Hitler more power. A temporary parliament was set up at Kroll Opera House in Berlin. On the 23rd of March 1933, the Reichstag meets there, under pressure. The speeches you are about to hear were recorded that day. Adolf Hitler demands full power. He stands up to speak.
Männer und Frauen des Deutschen Reichstags.
He introduces the Enabling Act as a law to remedy the distress of the people.
Die Regierung beabsichtigt dabei, von diesem Gesetz nur insoweit.
He goes on to state that the government only intends to use the law insofar as is necessary to implement vital measures, and the existence of Parliament shouldn't be threatened.
Soll dadurch bedroht sein.
As Hitler finishes speaking,
Nun mehr selbst die Entscheidung treffen über Frieden oder Krieg.
There is a show of support for him. There's a break of around 3 hours, and then at 6:16 p.m, everyone is back in the Opera House. They sing the national anthem. Although Hitler promises moderation, the law he proposes will end parliamentary democracy.
Das Wort hat der Abgeordnete Wels.
The Social Democratic Party's Otto Wels is the only voice that dares to say no. He stands before the Reichstag.
Freedom and life can be taken away from us, but not honor. After the persecutions that the Social Democratic Party has recently experienced, no one will be able to reasonably demand and expect it to vote for the enabling law introduced here.
Wels speaks with courage and warns of the consequences of the Enabling Act.
Never before, since there was a German Reichstag, has the control of public affairs by the elected representatives of the people been switched off to the extent that is happening now and is supposed to happen even more through the new Enabling Act. Such omnipotence of the government must have all the more serious repercussions inasmuch as the press too lacks any freedom of expression.
The recording of Wels's speech cuts out, but the following words are taken from the stenographic report from the session. Wels criticises Hitler's Nazi party.
If the gentlemen of the National Socialist Party wanted to carry out socialist deeds, they would not need an Enabling Act. You would be certain of the overwhelming majority in the House. Nevertheless, you want to shut down the Reichstag for the time being in order to continue your revolution
He talks about the achievements of his own party.
We helped to create a Germany in which not only princes and barons, but also men from the working class had the opportunity to lead the state. You cannot go back on that without giving up on your own leader.
As Welz speaks, he is frequently heckled by Nazi party members. But he continues.
The attempt to turn back the wheel of history will remain futile. We see the power political reality of your current rule, but the people's sense of justice is also a political power, and we will not stop appealing to this sense of justice.
And a pledge from Welz.
In this historic hour, we, German Social Democrats, solemnly pledge ourselves to the principles of humanity and justice, of freedom and socialism. No enabling act gives you the power to destroy ideas that are eternal and indestructible.
His final words are not just for the chamber, but for the people, for those already suffering under Nazi rule. A message of solidarity, of hope.
We greet the persecuted and the oppressed. We greet our friends in the Reich. Your steadfastness and loyalty deserve admiration. The courage of your convictions and your unbroken optimism guarantee a brighter future.
Hitler mocks Welz and the Social Democrats.
Sie, meine Herren, sind nicht mehr benötigt.
You are no longer needed.
Der Stern Deutschlands will aufgehen und Ihre wird sinken.
The star of Germany will rise and yours will sink. Göring, the Reichstag president, announces the vote.
Meine Damen und Herren, wir kommen jetzt zur Schlussabstimmung.
The vote proceeds. There are 444 votes for, 94 votes against. The Enabling Act passes. Otto Welz's Social Democrats stand alone. Hitler has unrestricted powers. The voice of Otto Welz was the last to speak freely in the Reichstag. His speech did not stop the Enabling Act, but is now viewed as heroic. Welz fled the country. He died in Paris in 1939, 2 weeks after the start of World War II. He has been described as Germany's bravest man in the fight against Hitler.
Jill Kersley with the story of the Enabling Act. 5 years later, and the Second World War was about to get underway. It would send shockwaves around the globe, including in Southeast Asia, which became a haven for more than 1,000 Jews fleeing Nazi Germany. Here's Megan Jones.
It's 1938, and in Manila, the capital of the Philippines, it's hot and humid. Arriving into the harbour, on board a ship, is a 7-year-old Jewish girl called Lottie Hirschfield.
When we left Germany, we felt, well, it's going to be so hot there. We're going to wear the tropical helmets, and we're going to wear knee socks, and we're going to wear white shorts.
4 weeks earlier, she was in Breslau, then part of Germany, now known as Wrocław in Poland.
It was exceedingly warm, but there were coconut trees, banana trees, and being a child and not having to wear heavy clothing and so forth, it was quite good for us.
The journey was long. This place is unfamiliar.
I was asked by someone, what made you go to Manila in the Philippines? And the very simple answer, we needed to get away from Hitler, and we needed to get into a city or to a country that let us in.
By 1935, life in Nazi Germany had become impossible for Jewish families.
The Jews were systematically excluded from German life. The 1935 Nuremberg laws outlawed marriage between Jews and other Germans and declared that Jews were not German citizens.
When my cousin and I would go to the park, we would see a bench. We'd take our little doll carriages, but we couldn't sit on the benches because the bench had dogs and Jews not allowed.
By 1937, when Lottie's father was fired from his job at a liquor company, the family started looking for a way out.
My dad was wise enough to know no sense going to anywhere in Europe because Hitler will get there.
Thousands of Jews emigrated from Germany during the 1930s, realizing that there could never be a fair or safe place for them in German society for as long as the Nazis ruled.
But as it became more difficult to find a safe haven, more than 10,000 kilometres away, one nation was willing to help.
It was a friend of my dad's who had been in the Philippines, done some electrical work. He had come back to Germany, and he said, you know, we have to get out. The Philippines are all right. The president has left the door open for us to come there. They are willing to let 10,000 come in.
President Manuel Quezon's policy would give Lottie's family and many others a lifeline in the Philippines. Although, little did they know, the sanctuary would only be temporary. After auctioning off their possessions, Lottie, her brother and parents fled to the city of Marseille in the south of France.
I could not understand why my mother was perennially crying. This was a little beyond me.
They went on trains, ships and used horse and carts, travelling through around 10 countries, including Italy, Egypt and Sri Lanka, which was formerly known as Ceylon. Their final stop on the long journey was a guest house in Manila in the Philippines.
What seemed strange was mosquito nets. Had never seen that. We decided, oh well, who needs that? But in the morning, I had 46 mosquito bites. So at that point, mosquito nets became very important.
Adapting to a new life wasn't always easy.
Having kept kosher, this became a problem. But someone knew a man, a shochet, who slaughtered chickens in Shanghai. The community brought the man over to the Philippines, and Mr. Han, who was the shochet, began killing kosher chickens. We had Filipino friends. We began to learn Tagalog, which is the Philippine language, and our parents learned English.
Then came a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, the US naval base in Hawaii, leading to this declaration by US President Franklin Roosevelt.
I ask that the Congress declare that since the unprovoked and dastardly attack by Japan on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, a state of war has existed between the United States and the Japanese Empire.
Hours after Pearl Harbor was targeted, Japan turned its sights to the Philippines, where the US had colonial power.
We were being bombed by the Japanese, and it was generally 12 planes that came every noontime, and they bombed.
Lottie's sanctuary suffered widespread destruction, and blackouts were enforced.
My mother had nothing in black, cover the windows, so she took an umbrella that she had, she ripped it open, and she covered the dining room chandelier. However, that night was a Japanese air raid, and because the cloth and the bulbs were hot, the whole thing began to light up. The Americans came in, and they claimed that we were sending signals to the Japanese.
Not long after, Japan seized control of the Philippines.
We were very unhappy with the Japanese occupation. The natives were starving. It was a very difficult time. We had hoped to get away from one oligarch, and here we came right into the smack in the middle of another.
By 1945, the US had taken back the Philippines, a key step towards the end of World War II.
The American flag went up, and we were beside ourselves. My dad had kept 2 or 3 bottles of liquor, of whiskey, and we all went out on the street, and there was a whole group of Texas Rangers, I believe they were. They were marching in. They had come into Manila, and we were passing out liquor to them.
Around 8 years after arriving in Manila, and with the city left in ruins, Lottie's father decided it was time for the family to leave.
Those of us who had no citizenship, we had to have relatives in the United States. And we were lucky to find a cousin in Baltimore, Maryland, and these people were kind enough, not knowing us and we not knowing them, to give us the visa and to give us the papers to come to the United States.
Once again, they packed their lives into bags and stepped into the unknown.
We did not know anything about winter at that point. We didn't know anything about winter clothes. And we did not know English that well.
Lottie eventually settled in Connecticut, where she worked in a library. Decades later, Manila has stayed close to her heart.
As I'm getting old now, and I'm beginning to look at Manila again, the other day I got really homesick. Somehow I remembered a good many things. I don't believe that President Quezon of the Philippines and that whole period of 1,300 families being saved has been given enough credit. We are still more than Schindler saved. I am here today because of Filipinos.
The voice of Lottie Hirschfield, now aged 94, speaking to Megan Jones. Her story and that of the Enabling Act in Germany will be added to our Second World War collection on the website. Go to bbc.com/witness history to find it. Now, this week's Sporting Witness. And this is the story of the Indian long-distance swimmer Bulla Chowdhury, who in 2004 became the first woman to complete the challenge of crossing straits connecting or separating the world's 7 seas. In 2020, she spoke to Maya Mitter about her career.
I dream about it, especially 7 seas.
Bulla Chowdhury has created history with epic long-distance sea swims around the world, which began in the chilly waters of the English Channel when she was just 19.
When I threw myself into the English water for the first time, I never thought I could cross it because it was unbearable cold.
As a girl, Bulla was enchanted by a fairy tale about a prince crossing the 7 seas to find her. But as an adult, it was Bulla, not the prince, who was crossing the waters.
When I started, it was my dream to cross the 7 seas. While crossing one by one, I realized that I have already become the first woman in the world.
By the end of her extraordinary quest, Bulla had swum 7 different sea crossings on 5 different continents. She was the first woman in the world to achieve this. Bulla grew up in a small town called Hindmotor in West Bengal. She loved the water from the very start.
I was not interested in going school and other kinds of stuff. I played with water wherever the water was there. I mean, in the bucket or anywhere. I used to play with that. And in my house, there is a pond nearby. My father used to take me there and he used to teach me swimming. So when I was 2 years old, I learned from that age.
Her parents could see that Bulla was special and decided to enroll her in a swimming club near the river Ganges.
It was then when the coach told my parents that I am a born swimmer. He promised them that he will make me a champion one day.
It was not long before her coach's words came true. Bula first became India's junior national champion when she was only 9 years old and started representing India internationally aged just 12. At the 1991 South Asian Federation Games, Bula won 6 gold medals for her country. How did it feel to be representing your country and winning at such a young age?
I cannot verbalize the feeling on the winning podium as the national anthem was being played. While I saw my national flag on the top, I felt like I am on cloud 9 while I was standing on the podium.
In the middle of all her success in the pool, Bula overheard a conversation that would change her life. They were talking about long-distance swimmers, and the stories of their exploits stirred something deep inside of Bula, taking her back to when she was a little girl playing with the water.
I used to dream during my childhood that a prince will come my crossing 7 seas and marry me. In Bengali, I say that Shat Samudro Tero Nodi Par Kore Ek Rajkumar Ashbe. This is a story in Bengali. So it was in my mind and dream that one day that story, it will come in reality.
Bula was determined to try to go from the swimming pool to the high seas. But despite all of her successes over short distances, many people told her that she couldn't swim long distances simply because she was a woman.
In my small village where I grew up, people used to judge based on gender. A girl has boundaries. People always say, no, you can't do it. Why not? Why not? So my challenge was there that why not? I will going to do this.
For her first sea crossing, Bula had set her sights on one of the most infamous stretches of water in the world, the English Channel, the sea between England and France.
I went to London at the age of 19 with hardly any knowledge about the English Channel. There is a big difference between the weather of India and England.
The water around Mumbai is warm all year round. The water in the English Channel is cold at the best of times and a lot colder than the water Bula had been training in.
I will say one thing, that when I went to the first day, I remember, I could not stay there for 15 minutes. It was so cold.
Back on dry land, Bula gave herself a talking to as she shivered with the cold.
You came, Bula, all the way from India to England. You cannot go back like that. You have to do something. You have to cross the English Channel. So I bear all the pain, all the cold. And from 15 minutes, I went up to 12 hours.
As well as the cold, Bula's body was becoming covered in painful rashes, a reaction to something that had bitten her in the water.
And it had unbearable pain. And it is so much painful that I could not sleep whole night.
Despite it all, on September 12th, 1989, Bula set out to cross the channel from the beach at Dover across 21 miles of cold, choppy water to the coast of France. "10 hours and 55 minutes later, she arrived.
So I conquered the cold and crossed the English Channel. As for the first time, I set my feet in France. I could breathe the fragrance of France with happiness as tears of joy came pouring out of my eyes while I said to myself, yes, I did it.
So after that first long-distance swim at only 19, you went back to competing in the pool, and it was many years before you next took the waves, right?
And after my son born, I motivated myself that my believing that a mother can take bigger challenges than anyone else.
10 years after Bula first crossed the English Channel, she returned to cross it again, becoming the first Asian woman to cross it twice. From that point on, there was no stopping Bula. She began to take on epic sea swims across the world, from Gibraltar to New Zealand.
In 2000, I have crossed Gibraltar Strait in Spain. I broke the world record over there. I crossed the New Zealand Cook Strait. I have made Asian record there.
Then Robben Island to the mainland of South Africa, the Tyrrhenian Gulf in Greece, and the Catalina Channel off the coast of California.
I had encountered many difficulties during those scenes. While crossing the Catilla Channel, I heard some shout telling me, look down, Bula, look down. So while I looked down, I saw two big eyes under the water. And I still didn't know what was that. Later on, I realized that was a big sunfish.
On August the 20th, 2004, Bula completed the last of her 7-sea crossings, the Palk Strait between India and Sri Lanka. After nearly 14 hours of swimming, a crowd waited for her on the beach to cheer her home. She had become the first woman in the world to cross 7 sea channels on 5 different continents.
Becoming the first woman in the world, it's not an easy thing. And coming from the middle class family, it's a great thing and great feelings. You can do anything you want, and you can inspire other women too. That if you're getting married, if you're getting child, that's the not life end. And I will say that is the starting. You can start again and do whatever you want.
Bula Chowdhury was speaking to Maya Mitter in 2020 for Sporting Witness. It was a Made in Manchester production. We're going back to 1969 and the publication of the Peter Principle, which put forward the suggestion that promotion leads to incompetence. Alex Last tells the story of its conception with the help of archive interviews.
When I was a boy, I used to believe my parents and believe my teachers and that you should have respect for your elders and betters, and that the men upstairs knew what they were doing. And I was taught that the more I would know, the further I would go. So I stayed in school, I got a degree, eventually got a teaching certificate, I went out to teach. And the first school I taught in, the principal was primarily concerned that the children did not step on the rose beds. And education seemed to be the furthest thing from his mind. I saw teachers and administrators that seemed incompetent, and I started to question some of these ideas I had.
In the early 1960s, the Canadian teacher, academic and psychologist Dr. Lawrence J. Peter was fascinated by a funny, if rather weighty question. Why, he pondered, were so many people clearly incompetent at their jobs? As evidence, he later told the BBC, was not exactly hard to find.
As I looked around me, I saw a sign on the door that said, "Emergency exit, authorized personnel only." I wondered who'd written that. But then later I saw another sign that said, "Emergency exit, not to be used under any circumstances."
He started to develop a theory to explain the rampant incompetence he witnessed. It would become known as the Peter Principle.
The Peter Principle states very simply that in any hierarchy, an employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence, and that's where he stays. You see, in any organization where competence is essentially eligibility for promotion and incompetence is a bar to promotion, wherever those rules apply, people will rise to their level of incompetence and tend to stay there.
Incompetence, he observed, was everywhere in hierarchies as people climbed the promotion ladder. As he put it, the cream rises until it sours.
A competent salesman, a man who is just terrific at dealing with people, his sales were so good that they made him sales manager. And in this position, he'd found his level of incompetence because he was atrocious at the paperwork, atrocious at designing territories for his salesmen. In other words, he was not good at dealing through other people or organizing other people. I saw competent engineers getting promoted to supervisory positions. They were great at dealing with things and incompetent at dealing with people. And the competent teacher may be incompetent as a department head. At the top of this hierarchy, I saw the headmaster, who frequently was a very competent teacher. When he came to this position of manager of this school, he'd found his level of incompetence. And there he'll remain until he retires or death or something removes him from this position. And so the system promoted them from what they could do to something they couldn't do.
Then, in 1963, Dr. Peter met an ally, the playwright Raymond Hull. He became a convert to the incompetence theory after the pair watched a calamitous amateur theatre production by an actor who mistakenly thought he could also direct. So together the pair wrote a book titled The Peter Principle, Why Things Always Go Wrong. It was a satire and parody of management theory, and so it was chock full of wonderful made-up jargon. Reaching your level of incompetence would induce final placement syndrome. Among the symptoms were rigor mortis, an obsession with organisation and charts, or perhaps tabulatory gigantism, an incompetent boss's insistence on a bigger desk. And then, of course, there were the classic symptoms of blaming subordinates, stress and self-pity.
The individual often will be successful, feel happy, and then he gets to a position which I call his level of incompetence, in which he's frustrated. He's no longer getting the satisfaction. He knows somehow that he isn't doing the job too well. This is where the person starts to develop tension, become bad-tempered, start blaming other people. So the individual may suffer all kinds of syndromes.
All this incompetence, Dr. Peter insisted, had consequences, and not just for the individual, but for society at large.
The social implications are very significant. When a person reaches his level of incompetence, he bungles his job, frustrates his co-workers, and erodes the efficiency of the organization.
After many rejections, the book was published in 1969 and became a bestseller. By the time of Dr. Peter's death in 1990, it had sold more than 8 million copies, and it's still in print. The Peter Principle entered pop culture, a kind of funny shorthand to explain incompetent bosses, perhaps because to many its satirical core idea also had a ring of truth. But could it actually be real? Well, to investigate, a recent study did look at what happened to sales teams in hundreds of companies across the US. The economist Professor Kelly Shue from Yale was one of the study's authors.
We first found that being a top sales performer leads to a very large probability in that that person will be promoted. We also find being twice as good at sales as someone else actually corresponds to the manager being about 6% worse, in that the manager lowers the performance of all of his or her subordinates by about 6%.
So what to do? The thing is, there's a problem. Studies also found that if you don't promote the people who are doing well or bring in a manager who lacks their staff's technical know-how, well, the workers don't like that either.
Firms are struggling with this because they feel pressure to promote based upon current performance for at least two reasons. The first is this type of promotion policy does really work at incentivizing workers to work harder and exert more effort. And the second reason is we found evidence of pretty strong discouragement effects. So if firms were to deviate from this policy, and let's say they promote a lower performing sales worker because they believe that person actually has more management potential, higher ranked sales workers appear to be discouraged. They lower their performance and are much more likely to leave the firm afterwards. So there's a retention problem that occurs if firms deviate from this policy of promoting based upon current performance.
So what's the solution? To avoid the Peter Principle, Kelly Shue suggests companies could create an alternative career path where skilled workers are properly rewarded in their existing field with more money or status, instead of forcing them to seek promotion to a managerial role. And if that's too logical, well, interestingly, another study suggested simply promoting people at random would also achieve better results. There is, of course, another way out. According to Dr. Peter's theory, all good work is done by those who haven't yet been promoted to their level of incompetence. So if you want to escape the promotion trap, the Peter Principle suggests one intriguing solution: creative incompetence. Deliberately pretend to be bad at a small, irrelevant aspect of the job you're good at, and that way you'll never be offered promotion. And remember, says Dr. Lawrence J. Peter, being promoted may not necessarily be good for you.
And this is where the big question about the Peter Principle arises. Should we go throughout life being conditioned to keep on accepting that next reward, to keep on running like a squirrel in a cage? Or should we use our ability to be rational and think about, where am I going? What is the purpose of my life? Is reward through promotion the reward for me? This is where the Peter Principle, written as satire to help people laugh at the problem, can actually help people make some of these very important decisions in their own lives.
Alex Last used archive interviews of Dr. Lawrence J. Peter in 2021 to tell the story of the Peter Principle. Well, our purpose is to continue to provide an ever-growing archive of first-hand testimony from the past, and to that end, not exactly like squirrels in a cage, we'll be back with another History Hour for you next week. But that's it for now. This is Max Pearson. From all of us here, thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Imagine being here.
Scientists have made the atomic bomb. The first one was dropped on a Japanese city this morning.
Here.
During the meeting, Mr. Mandela was informed of the government's decision regarding his release.
And here.
Witnesses have spoken of a wall of water that swept coastlines in Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Thailand.
Hear from the people who were there.
He heard me praying while he was shooting, and he just stopped. And he said, I'm not going to. I'm going to leave you here to tell the story.
Knowing that you have a spy and that you're following a spy, it doesn't get any cooler than that.
Witness History brings you first-hand accounts.
Merkel gets up and says, I'm going, and Tusk says, I'm locking the door, nobody's leaving, you're reaching a compromise, or you're not leaving this room.
Was it shopping carts that made you rich?
Well, they didn't make me poor.
Listen now. Search for Witness History wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Hi, I'm Simon Jack.
I'm Zing Sing.
And Good Bad Billionaire is back for a new season.
Delving into the lives and livelihoods of more of the world's billionaires.
Like the owner of Russia's largest online retailer, Wild Berries. She's Russia's first self-made female billionaire, Tatiana Kim.
The action movie icon and former governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
And the co-founder of Snapchat, a billionaire at just 25 years old, Evan Spiegel.
Simon and I are asking you to decide if they're good, bad, or just another billionaire.
That's Good Bad Billionaire from the BBC World Service.
Listen now wherever you get your BBC podcasts.